never made it, but I know what it takes. I'm motivated by a mix of emotion. Got my statement, and I'm reading it slow so I can understand it fully. Appreciate my standing, go out of this world and right on time. Oh, never in my life have I seen the sky light up like this. I'm far away from Earth and I wanna know if you exist. Mission control, do you read me? Send me my coordinates lately. Mission control, am I drifting? Tie me to someone who will love me, yeah. Wait, I think I'll last a bit longer. Find another.
Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to another Ref Brandon and the Todd Family YouTube video. Wherever you are, whatever you may be doing, thank you so much for making Ref Brandon and the Todd Family part of your day. We always greatly appreciate it. It's time for another edition of Where Are They Now? Except for today's going to be a little bit different because the guy's actually nowhere to be found that we know of in any kind of capacity. So today it's going to be more of a do you remember? And of course it's about a wrestler, and the reason why I say he's nowhere to be found is because he's not one of these wrestlers that has retired and gotten an everyday job. He doesn't have any kind of daily job. He doesn't do podcast. He doesn't do radio. He's pretty much stayed away from the business altogether and just kept to himself. And I'm talking about a man that was born February the 12th of 1960. So he'll be 64 years old next month. When he wrestled in his prime, he was 6'9", 450 pounds. He was born in Chicago, Illinois. A lot of people think he was born in South Carolina. That's not so. He was born in Chicago, but his family moved to Spartanburg, South Carolina when he was 5 years old. So he spent the rest of his childhood there. And when he first became a big-time wrestler, he lived in South Carolina for the majority of his career. He was billed from Halsted Street in Chicago as one gimmick, but he was billed from Deepest, Darkest Africa in another gimmick. He debuted in 1977. He had his official retirement in 2009. He actually originally retired in 2001, but he came out of retirement in 2007 and had a couple of matches and then retired for good in 2009 at the age of 49. Now, all of his ring names are UEI Gang, Panama Gang, the One Man Gang, George Gray, Crusher Gray, Crusher Broomfield, and Akeem, the African Dream. And his real name is George Gray. Now, he's not the George Gray who is the guy that does all the talking on The Price is Right. This is George Gray, the wrestler. And if you can't tell by the name Akeem, the African Dream, that was, of course, a play on Dusty Rhodes being the American Dream, because for whatever reason, I've never tried to do a backstory and find out why, but Vince McMahon and Dusty Rhodes just flat out did not like each other. So one of Vince's ways to make fun of Dusty Rhodes was to take plain old George Gray and all of a sudden say he found himself and put him with Slick and say he's from the deepest, darkest Africa, and his name is Akeem, the African Dream. So you have this 450-pound man that comes to the ring and does, I guess you call it dancing. It was the worst display of dancing you've ever seen. And George Gray himself came out and said he had no rhythm at all. He was just trying to jive a little bit. But Vince and Dusty Rhodes always went back and forth because they just did not like each other. The reason why back in the day Vince McMahon made Dusty Rhodes wear that black gear with the yellow polka dots was trying to embarrass Dusty Rhodes, and put him with a female manager named Sapphire, and they had no chemistry at all, didn't even know each other. But Vince was doing that trying to embarrass Dusty Rhodes. And then, of course, at one time they had that wrestler named Virgil. Well, Vince gave him the name Virgil because Dusty Rhodes' real name was Virgil. And that was Vince's way to let the whole world know that Dusty Rhodes' real name was Virgil. And then, of course, when Dusty Rhodes went to WCW, he turned Virgil into Vincent because that was Vince's real name. So Vince and Dusty Rhodes just did not get along. So Akeem, the African Dream, was a play on Dusty Rhodes being the American Dream. And it was actually very successful for a while, and for whatever reason, they just all of a sudden tried to take the character a different direction, and it just did not work anymore. But George Gray is one of those, as I said a while ago, that just kind of retired and stayed away from the business. You can get on different podcasts and YouTube wrestling type stuff and find different interviews he's done with different wrestling type people, but none of them are really long, and it's only as a special guest on occasion. It's not something he does all the time. And he occasionally does like a book signing or something like that, but for the most part, he just stays at home and spends time with his family. But just to show you how professional he was, and everybody that has met George Gray has said he is one of the nicest people that you'll ever meet in your life. But back in 2016, he lived in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He may still live there, I'm not sure, but back in 2016, he lived in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And he had a contract signing, book signing, autograph signing, whatever you want to call it, where him and a bunch of other wrestlers get together and take pictures with fans and sign autographs and, sign books and all that kind of good stuff. Well, right before that happened, he nearly lost his home in Baton Rouge due to the Louisiana floods. Well, while that flooding is going on and his house is submerged and he lost almost everything, he had to go to this book signing. Well, he didn't back out of it. He still went. And he was asked by one of the other wrestlers there, "Hey man, how's things going for you?" And he said, "Well, pretty good, but my wife and kids are at home now. We almost lost our home due to the floods." And they said, "Well, why didn't you back out and stay home with your family?" And he said, "Well, I called and checked on them, but I was paid to be here, had an obligation to be here, so I feel like I need to be here." So that just goes to show how professional he was, that even with something bad like that happening, he felt like, hey, if you're going to pay me to be there and these fans expect me to be there, I've got to be there. So since he did nearly lose his home due to the Louisiana floods, he actually had a GoFundMe, but of course this is back in 2016. I don't know how much money was raised. And he may still live in Louisiana, I'm not sure. But if you remember the One Man Gang, please feel free to let me know. The UEI Gang and the Panama Gang and Crusher Gray, and of course his real name of George Gray, all those gimmicks were shortly lived. And if I'm not mistaken, he used Crusher Broomfield when he first got started back in 1977. But the two gimmicks he's most known for are One Man Gang and Akeem, the African Dream. He actually was going to be part of the WrestleMania 17 gimmick battle royal, if you remember that. He was supposed to be Akeem, the African Dream, in that battle royal, but they didn't call him until about a month before the actual event. And he asked them, what do you want me to be? And they said, well, we'd like for you to be Akeem. But at that point, George had lost over 100 pounds, so the Akeem outfit just didn't fit anymore. So he told him, well, I've got it, but I've lost so much weight, it doesn't fit anymore. And they said, well, it's too close to the event now for anybody to make you some good gear in this short amount of time, so just be One Man Gang. So he had found some One Man Gang gear that he had on it back in the day, because when he first started, he was big, but then he got bigger, and then he lost the weight. So he wore the One Man Gang gear that he had before he put on weight, because after that weight loss, that Akeem gear just did not fit anymore. If you have not watched George as Akeem, the African Dream, I encourage you to go watch it, because it's actually very entertaining. But he moved very good wrestling-wise for a big man. Not dancing-wise, because he had no rhythm at all. But as far as wrestling, he moved very good for a big man. So any thoughts on this, please feel free to let me know. Homes for Our Troops is a publicly funded 501c nonprofit organization that builds and donates specially adapted custom homes nationwide for severely injured post 9/11 veterans. Since the 2004 inception, nearly 90 cents of every dollar spent has gone directly to our program services for veterans. Visit at hfotusa.org. Let's go ahead and get our dad joke of the day in here. What do you call a fraudulent Japanese warrior? A samurai. And that does it for today's Ref Brandon and the Todd Family YouTube video. Until next time, it's Ref Brandon saying, just like in pro wrestling, life can be over by the count of 3. Tell your friends and family how much you love them. Bye.